My name is Lydia Coleman. I'm 40 years old. And the night I brought down a $3 billion mafia empire didn't start with gunfire or betrayal or blood on my hands. It started with Jessica Martinez laughing at my Target dress. 20-year reunion, Jefferson High gymnasium that still smelled like teenage desperation and broken dreams. While my former classmates performed their success like Broadway actors waving house keys to McMansions, flashing Rolex watches, name-dropping their children's private schools, I nursed a warm Bud Light and carried a secret that could collapse governments. Some people never change, Jessica announced to our circle, her eyes scanning my off-the-rack outfit with surgical precision. Still shopping clearance racks, Lydia? Still pretending you matter? The laughter cut through conversations about stock portfolios and European vacations. 20 pairs of eyes that had once dismissed me as most likely to disappear were doing it again, measuring my worth in thread counts and zip codes. Then it rang, and everything changed. The Jefferson High gymnasium looked exactly like it had 20 years ago, only smaller. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that institutional yellow glow across polished hardwood floors that still carried the ghost scent of teenage angst and forgotten dreams. Red, white, and blue streamers hung from basketball hoops like surrender flags, and a hand-painted banner proclaimed Class of 2004 10 years strong, in letters that already looked tired. I stood in the doorway wearing my simple black dress from Nordstrom Rack, watching my former classmates perform their success like it was opening night on Broadway. The same hierarchies that had ruled these halls 2 decades ago were alive and thriving under the gymnasium lights. Football stars who'd peaked at 18 now sported beer guts and receding hairlines, but they still commanded center stage, regaling anyone within earshot with stories about their construction companies and real estate ventures. From queens turned suburban moms displayed their engagement rings like trophies, their conversations a carefully choreographed symphony of humble brags about children's private schools and family vacations to Turks and Caicos. I slipped in quietly, my heels clicking against the wood like a countdown timer nobody else could hear. Lydia fucking Coleman. The voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife through silk. Jessica Martinez appeared beside me, martini in hand, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She looked exactly like I'd expected, Botox smoothing the edges of 40, designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, diamond tennis bracelet catching the light with calculated precision. "I cannot believe you actually showed up," she continued, her voice carrying that particular blend of fake enthusiasm and genuine surprise that I remembered from AP history. "We were just talking about you." The way she said talking about you made it clear they hadn't been discussing my charitable contributions or professional achievements. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "you look exactly the same." Her laugh was crystalline and hollow. "Flatterer. Come on, you have to meet everyone. They're going to die when they see you." She grabbed my arm with manicured fingers and steered me toward a cluster of round tables where familiar faces were engaged in the ritualistic comparing of life scorecards that defines every high school reunion. "Look who I found lurking by the door," Jessica announced to the table like she'd discovered buried treasure. "Our very own Lydia Coleman." The conversation stopped mid-sentence. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward me with the kind of polite interest usually reserved for distant relatives at funerals. "Lydia!" Brad Stevens stood up, his varsity jacket straining against a frame that had expanded considerably since graduation. "Wow, it's been forever. What are you up to these days?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I could see them waiting for my answer, cataloging whatever I said against their own achievements. Brad had just finished regaling the group with stories about his HVAC business pulling in 6 figures. Sarah Chen was fresh off describing her corner office at a pharmaceutical company. Mike Rodriguez had been mid-brag about his Tesla Model S when I'd arrived. "Government work," I said, keeping it vague. "Nothing too exciting." The collective deflation was almost audible. Government work, translation, bureaucratic drone, pension chaser, someone who'd settled for stability over ambition. "Oh," Sarah said, her voice carrying that particular tone of pity mixed with relief. "That's nice. Steady work." Steady work. The kiss of death in a room full of entrepreneurs and rising professionals. "What department?" Mike asked, though his attention had already started drifting toward his phone. "Various agencies," I replied. "I move around a lot, Jessica's smile grew sharper. Still keeping secrets, I see. Some things never change. Some things never change. If she only knew how much had changed, how many times I'd died and been reborn with new identities, new histories, new faces in new mirrors. Speaking of never changing, Brad interjected, settling back into his chair with the authority of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. Remember senior year when Lydia thought she was going to be some kind of international spy? What was it you used to say? You were going to save the world or something? The laughter that followed was gentle but devastating. Not cruel, that would have been easier to handle. This was worse. This was the polite amusement of people who remembered my teenage dreams as quaint delusions, evidence of a girl who'd never learned to adjust her expectations to match her limitations. That's right, Sarah chimed in, warming to the memory. You were obsessed with those spy movies. What was that one with Angelina Jolie? Salt, I said quietly. Salt, that's right. You must have watched that movie 100 times. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Not the movie the night 3 weeks ago when I'd sat in a stolen car outside a warehouse in Newark, watching mafia lieutenants move duffel bags full of cash while I recorded their conversations through a directional microphone hidden in my jacket button. Life has a way of humbling us all, Jessica said, raising her martini like she was delivering a toast. We all had such big dreams back then. Big dreams. As if wanting to make a difference in the world was something to be outgrown, like acne or musical theater. Some of us learned to be realistic, Brad added, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. That's what separates the adults from the dreamers. Adults from dreamers. I thought about the 18 months I'd spent infiltrating the Torino crime family's money laundering operation. About the nights I'd lain awake in safe houses from Prague to Panama City, listening to recordings of men discussing murder-like menu options while I built cases that would send them to federal prison for life. But there was no way to explain that without blowing a cover that had cost the federal government $3 million and 2 years of careful planning. No way to tell them that while they'd been climbing corporate ladders, I'd been climbing fire escapes in Palermo, breaking into offices where the Cosa Nostra kept their digital books. The thing about Lydia, Jessica continued, her voice getting louder as alcohol and audience attention emboldened her, is that she never learned when to give up. Even in high school, she was always chasing these impossible fantasies. Impossible fantasies. Like the fantasy I'd lived last month when I'd posed as a cryptocurrency consultant to gain access to the family's blockchain operations. Like the impossible dream of bringing down a criminal empire that had been operating with impunity for 60 years. Remember prom? Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and bright. She went alone because she said she was too focused on her future to date. We all thought she was just making excuses. I did remember prom. I remembered staying home that night to study for my Mandarin final because I'd already been accepted to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service. I remembered the acceptance letter from the CIA's undergraduate scholarship program that I'd never told anyone about. She'll never be successful in her whole life, Jessica announced, her voice carrying across the gymnasium like a verdict delivered from on high. Look at her. 40 years old, no husband, no kids, government salary. Nothing to show for all those big dreams. The laughter that erupted around the table wasn't malicious. It was worse than malicious. It was casual, dismissive, the sound of people who'd never questioned their own definitions of success. I sat there, gripping my wine glass until my knuckles turned white, feeling the weight of every classified operation I'd ever run, every life I'd saved, every criminal I'd helped put behind bars. While they'd been accumulating stock portfolios and suburban real estate, I'd been accumulating evidence against organizations that trafficked children, sold weapons to terrorists, and corrupted governments from Albania to Zimbabwe. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text message I couldn't check without drawing attention, but I knew what it said. The Torino operation was complete, 47 arrests across 6 countries. A money laundering network worth $3 billion dismantled. 26 banks in 14 countries implicated in the largest financial crime investigation in European history. But in this gymnasium, surrounded by the smell of punch and the sound of middle-aged laughter, I was still just Lydia Coleman. The girl who'd dreamed too big, reached too high, forgotten her place in the natural order of things. The girl who'd never learned when to give up on impossible fantasies. If only they knew that some fantasies were worth never giving up on. If only they knew that in about 30 seconds, everything they thought they knew about success was about to change forever. Jessica was still savoring the laughter from her verdict about my life when my phone cut through the gymnasium like a scalpel through skin. Not the cheerful chime of a social call or the gentle buzz of a text message. This was the sharp, commanding tone reserved for federal emergencies, the sound that had woken me from hotel beds in 14 countries over the past 18 months. The conversation at our table died mid-sentence. Jessica's martini paused halfway to her lips. Brad's story about his latest HVAC contract evaporated into the gymnasium air like morning mist. I pulled the phone from my purse with the same calm precision I'd used to extract classified documents from hidden safes in 3 different continents. The caller ID showed only a number I'd memorized but never saved, a direct line that bypassed every security protocol the United States government had ever invented. "This is Coleman," I said, my voice carrying the professional authority that had been trained into me at Quantico, honed in Prague, and perfected in the back rooms of Atlantic City casinos. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me with the kind of attention usually reserved for car accidents or natural disasters. I could see them processing the change in my demeanor, the way my spine straightened, my shoulders squared. My voice took on the cadence of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her predatory smile frozen in place as she waited for whatever embarrassing personal call was about to confirm her assessment of my insignificant life. I pressed the speaker button. Agent Coleman, the voice that filled the gymnasium, carried the weight of absolute authority, crisp, commanding, unmistakably official. "This is Secretary of Defense Harold Morrison." The silence that followed wasn't the polite quiet of people being considerate during a phone call. This was the stunned absence of sound that occurs when reality shifts so fundamentally that the human brain needs time to recalibrate. Secretary of Defense. The words hung in the air above our reunion table, like a verdict delivered from Mount Olympus. "I wanted to personally thank you for your extraordinary courage during Operation Silent Thunder. Your 18-month infiltration of the Torino crime family's financial network has resulted in the exposure of a multi-billion-dollar money laundering scheme." Brad's beer bottle slipped from nerveless fingers, amber liquid splashing across the white tablecloth in slow motion. Sarah's mouth fell open like a broken door hinge. Mike Rodriguez stared at me with the expression of someone watching their understanding of the universe collapse in real time. "Your work," Secretary Morrison continued, his voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium's stunned silence, "has crippled their operations across 6 states and 3 European countries. We've seized assets worth over $3.7 billion and arrested 47 high-ranking members of organized crime." $3.7 billion. The number hit that reunion table like a meteorite striking suburban Earth. I watched Jessica's face as she processed what she was hearing. The same woman who'd spent the last hour explaining why I'd never amount to anything was now listening to the Secretary of Defense describe operations that had dominated international headlines for the past week. "The intelligence you gathered while undercover has also led to the discovery of corruption networks within the banking systems of 12 countries," Morrison's voice continued. "Your psychological profile, tactical training, and linguistic abilities made you uniquely qualified for this assignment." Linguistic abilities. I thought about the nights I'd spent in Palermo speaking Sicilian dialect so convincingly that third-generation mafia soldiers had trusted me with their deepest secrets. About the mornings in Geneva when I'd negotiated money transfers in perfect Swiss German while wearing a wire that recorded every incriminating word. "The President has asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your service to the nation. Your actions have quite literally saved American lives and struck a devastating blow against international organized crime." The President of the United States had asked the Secretary of Defense to personally thank the woman they'd spent the evening dismissing as a government drone with no prospects. Around our table, the same people who'd been bragging about their suburban achievements 5 minutes earlier now sat in shell-shocked silence. Their 6-figure salaries suddenly seemed very small compared to billion-dollar international operations. Their corner offices felt cramped next to briefing rooms in the Pentagon. "Agent Coleman," Morrison's voice took on a warmer tone, "your cover is officially blown as of this call, which means I can finally tell you what your colleagues think of your work. You're being recommended for the Intelligence Star, the highest civilian award the CIA can bestow." Intelligence Star, the highest civilian award. for the woman Jessica had just declared would never be successful in her whole life. I could see the exact moment when recognition dawned in their faces. Not just the recognition that they'd been wrong about me that would have been embarrassing enough. This was the recognition that they'd been catastrophically, fundamentally, universe-alteringly wrong about reality itself. There will be a formal ceremony at Langley next month, Morrison concluded. The director wanted me to tell you personally that your sacrifice and dedication represent the very best of American intelligence services. Langley, CIA headquarters, where the woman in the Target dress from Nordstrom Rack would be honored for dismantling criminal empires while her high school classmates had been climbing corporate ladders. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It's been an honor to serve." "The honor," Morrison replied, "has been entirely ours." The line went dead, leaving behind a silence so complete I could hear the air conditioning cycling in the gymnasium's ceiling. 20 people stared at me like I was an alien who'd just materialized at their reunion table. The same faces that had been animated with laughter and casual cruelty moments earlier now carried expressions of shock, awe, and something that might have been shame. Jessica's martini glass had left a ring of condensation on the tablecloth, the ice slowly melting while she processed the fact that the woman she'd been mocking was about to receive the highest honor American intelligence could bestow. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. Sarah was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Mike Rodriguez was staring at his phone like it might provide some rational explanation for what had just happened. But it was Jessica's face that I studied most carefully. The same woman who'd announced my failure to the entire table was now confronting the reality that while she'd been selling pharmaceutical products to suburban doctors, I'd been infiltrating criminal organizations that most people only encountered in movies. "Lydia," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gymnasium's ambient hum, You're really CIA," I said quietly. 18 years of service. Deep cover operations, counterintelligence, organized crime infiltration. The words hit our reunion table like controlled demolitions, systematically destroying every assumption they'd built about who I was and what I'd been doing with my life. For the first time in 20 years, Jefferson High's class of 2004 was completely speechless. And I realized that the girl who'd dreamed of saving the world hadn't been chasing impossible fantasies after all. She'd been preparing for the life she was always meant to live. The silence that settled over table 7 wasn't the comfortable quiet of people digesting good news. This was the heavy, suffocating silence that follows when people realize they've been fundamentally wrong about everything they thought they understood. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 18 years of classified operations lifting from my shoulders like shed armor. Around me, 20 faces stared with the kind of attention they'd never given me in high school, not the dismissive glances or polite acknowledgments I was used to, but genuine recognition mixed with something that looked like fear. "All my life," I said, my voice cutting through the gymnasium air with the authority I'd learned in briefing rooms where nations' fates were decided. "You measured me against your definitions of success." I walked around the table, my heels clicking against the polished wood with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown timer reaching 0. Money, cars, suburban houses with 3-car garages and granite countertops. You laughed when I didn't fit your metrics. You pitied me when I couldn't compete in your game. The memory hit me then, sharp and vivid. 3 months ago, sitting in a wine bar in Palermo, listening to Vincent Torino describe how his family moved children across international borders like livestock. The weight of the recording device hidden in my jewelry, capturing evidence that would destroy a criminal empire that had operated for 6 decades. But while you mocked my failure to accumulate the symbols of success you recognized, I was dismantling an empire built on blood and children's tears. I stopped in front of Jessica, the same woman who'd announced my worthlessness to the table 5 minutes earlier. Her martini sat untouched, ice slowly melting while she processed the fact that the woman she'd been pitying had been protecting civilization itself. "You want to know what my days look like while you were climbing corporate ladders?" I asked, my voice getting quieter and somehow more dangerous. 6 months ago, I was in a shipping container in the port of Newark, watching mafia soldiers move briefcases full of cash while I recorded every transaction through a camera hidden in my wedding ring. The image flashed through my mind like a movie reel. The cramped metal container, the smell of diesel fuel and fear, the weight of knowing that one wrong move would mean a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens. But also the satisfaction of watching Vincent Torino's nephew describe their money laundering operation in detail, unaware that every word was being transmitted to federal agents 3 miles away. 8 months ago, I spent 72 hours in a basement in Atlantic City, pretending to be a drug-addicted accountant while calculating the flow of dirty money through cryptocurrency exchanges. The youngest victim I helped rescue was 9 years old. 9. Sarah Chen made a choking sound. Brad's face had gone white as bone. Around the table, the same people who'd spent the evening bragging about quarterly bonuses were now confronting the reality that my meaningless government job involved saving children from horrors they couldn't imagine. You measured success in stock portfolios and vacation homes, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I measured it in lives saved, in evil brought to its knees, in children who will grow up free because someone was willing to walk into hell to bring them home. I thought about Maria Santos, the 9-year-old who'd been sold by her own father to men who saw children as commodities. She was safe now, placed with a foster family in Colorado who specialized in helping trafficked children recover from trauma. She'd drawn me a picture last week, a woman in a suit standing next to a house full of children, all of them smiling under a bright yellow sundae. The difference between us, I said, looking around the table at faces that had spent 20 years dismissing me as insignificant, is that you needed external validation to know your worth. I found mine in serving something bigger than myself. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Lydia, we had no idea. We never knew. You never asked, I said, not unkindly but with the firmness that comes from years of delivering hard truths to people who didn't want to hear them. You decided who I was based on what you could see. What fit your definitions of achievement? What looked impressive at cocktail parties? I picked up my purse and car keys, preparing to leave a reunion that had become something none of us had expected. I spent 18 years proving myself to rooms full of people who would never understand what I did or why I did it. But I stopped needing your approval somewhere around the time I realized that my worth wasn't determined by your ability to recognize it. Mike Rodriguez spoke up, his corporate confidence completely shattered. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Because my cover required it, I said. Because the children I was trying to save needed me to be invisible. Because sometimes the most important work happens in shadows, done by people who never ask for credit. I walked toward the gymnasium exit, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations starting people trying to process what they'd just witnessed, attempting to reconcile the woman in the Target dress with the CIA operative who'd been honored by the Secretary of Defense. Lydia, Jessica called after me, her voice desperate and broken. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. We didn't know who you really were. I paused at the doorway, looking back at this room where I'd spent so many years feeling small and inadequate. That's just it, Jessica. You never bothered to find out who I really was. You created a story about my failure and lived in it for 20 years rather than asking questions that might have challenged your assumptions. I smiled then, not with triumph or vindication, but with something lighter and more profound, the peace that comes from finally understanding your own worth. The girl you mocked at 17 was the woman who saved your world at 40. The dreamer you dismissed as unrealistic turned out to be the only one among us brave enough to chase dreams that actually mattered. As I walked out into the night, leaving behind a reunion that had become a reckoning, I felt something I'd never experienced in relation to my high school classmates. Pity. Not because they'd been wrong about me, that was their limitation, not my failure. But because they'd spent 20 years measuring worth in quarterly reports and property values while the real heroes worked in silence to keep their comfortable world intact. The woman who'd infiltrated the Torino crime family didn't need their permission to know her value. She'd been proving it in rooms they'd never see, fighting battles they'd never comprehend, serving causes they'd never understand. And walking away from their shock and shame, I realized that the girl who'd dreamed of saving the world hadn't been chasing impossible fantasies after all. She'd been preparing for the life she was always meant to live. If Lydia's story resonated with you, tell us your reunion story. Have you ever faced judgment at a reunion, family gathering, or professional event? Share in the comments how you handled being underestimated or dismissed by people from your past. Tag someone who needs this reminder. We all know someone brilliant who's been made to feel small by people who couldn't see their true worth. Send this to that person. Sometimes we need to remember that other people's limited vision doesn't define our reality. Question your own assumptions. Before you judge someone's lack of success, ask yourself, what don't I know about their story? What invisible battles might they be fighting? What hidden contributions might they be making? Subscribe for more untold stories. Hit that follow button for stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things while the world sleeps. The real heroes rarely make headlines until years later.